Hello, and welcome to another Industry Careers for PhDs podcast brought to you by Cheeky Scientist. I'm your host, Isaiah Henkel. If you're interested in listening to this full interview, go to cheekyscientist.com/association and learn how to become an associate and get access to all of our job training materials for PhDs. If you'd like to get these highlights delivered to your email inbox every week, go to cheekyscientist.com and subscribe under where it says Start Here. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Today, we will be talking to Arunodoy Sur about careers in project management. Arunodoy currently works as a senior analyst and project manager at Ovation Diagnostics. He has been very successful there. He's certified in clinical data management, received that certification from the FDA. He has an advanced certificate in biotechnology and intellectual property, and has done all of this while getting a visa to work in the US. So he's familiar with international challenges as well. And despite that, he's been able to get into these positions and clearly define what it takes to be a successful project manager. And that's what we will be discussing today. So we're going to jump in with Arunodoy now. Thanks for being here, Arunodoy.
Hi, Isaiah. It's great to be here for another webinar.
Yeah, good to have you on. Okay, so every time we have somebody who's made this transition into industry, we always like to just hear about their story, because we have most people on, as you know, right now that are listening. They're trying to make this transition. So maybe you can just talk to us briefly, take us through the story of why you decided to transition to out of academia and into industry, and how you did it.
So as everybody must have heard when you were reading my background, I always wanted, even before I started my PhD, I knew I'll be in the industry, and that's why in between my master's and PhD, I worked, something that's in the industry for Accenture, and that involved scientific knowledge, but it was not at all bench work. So I always knew that, and that's how I prepared myself. And even so it was not like a difficult decision, how some people get their PhD, then work a couple of years in academic postdoc, and then they decide to move out. It was different in my case. I always knew, and that's why even I chose a project that had like translational value. If you look at my LinkedIn profile or my resume, you will see that I always, even when I was a PhD student, like from the very beginning, I tried to like get involved with technology transfer office. I got involved with out licensing of the patent that resulted from our work in the lab. And so all that, like, even though that was not like I was doing extra work, it paid off. Like that helped me transition. So that's something like I was very like sure about, that I'll work in industry, and that too, like I'll use my scientific knowledge, but I won't do R&D bench work. And I knew that when I was doing my master's.
Yeah, and I know that for some people, maybe you've made this decision. For those of you listening, maybe you made a decision, fairly late in your academic career. Maybe you're still kind of not sure. You're on the fence. Yeah, but Arunodoy is one of the examples where he knew that a PhD could be a means to getting one of these jobs in industry. So I think it's valuable for a lot of you guys to think, stop thinking of, oh, I failed academia, or I failed with my PhD, and now I got to go. I don't even like the term alternative careers, right? Because industry is the primary career for PhDs by far. When you look at the numbers, and so I think it's important for. It's important for Arunodoy to share his experience and his viewpoint, because I really like his perspective. Okay, so you knew you wanted to get into industry, and you had your leanings prior to transitioning. What motivated you once you were in industry to get into project management? What did you like about this area in particular?
There are two things. First, I wanted to do something where I can use my scientific knowledge, but not like R&D work in the bench. And so this gives me that opportunity. And also, I think the career you choose should all match a little bit with your personality and what kind of person you are. And I love working in cross-functional teams and collaborative projects. And so this gave me the opportunity. And also, if you're working in translation of R&D or in clinical trials, it gives you the satisfaction of seeing like something coming to fruition. It's towards the end of like a innovative drug or a medical device. So these are the main reasons why I chose this path.
Yeah, and so let's break this down a little bit, because I mean, some people listening know and some people don't know. But some of these phrases, what do you mean when you say cross-functional teams?
So cross-functional teams, if I tell you, like, basically what I do now, I talk to people who are involved in finance, like maintaining budget, and I'm involved. I give inputs in that. I give inputs and get involved in making timelines for projects. I work with R&D people who are doing our, say, antibody production or generating, like, testing a new immunoassay. So there I'm using, like, I'm looking, basically reading papers and looking at Western blotting data. Then again, I'm doing project management work. So I'm interacting with all these different kind of people and kind of working with all of them. And so that is a cross-functional environment.
No, I think that's important for you guys to know. And just to backtrack a little bit, so when you're making the decision, like, about industry, for most of us, it's just like academia or industry. But you need to open up that black box of industry. And I think the next question to ask is, do I want to stay at the bench, go into R&D, or away from the bench? If you decide to go into R&D, then, you drill down further and you say, okay, do I want to do something that's more like a research scientist position or more like project management? And there's really, there's a lot of differentiators, but two big ones are, you're going to be working, it's a much more you're going to be working with much more different teams, like Arunodoy just said, right? So these cross-functional teams, you're going to be rotating, going to a lot of different meetings, and really communicating between different departments to get a project or a product, out the door to market, wherever it might be. That's one big difference. Whereas a research scientist, you're going to be at the bench and you could work on many different products and many different projects, and whether it's QC or innovating, different aspects of things, it's much more specialized. So I think that's an important thing to realize, because like Arunodoy said, you want to match this with your personality. If you like being at the bench, you like going very, very deep, right? Then a research scientist might be a good fit. If you like doing a variety of things and you like going not deep, but you like going, I guess broad would be the way, this project management position makes more sense. So I think that's important. And then one other way that we differentiate it, and I've heard Arunodoy talk about it too, is, with project, like he said translating, into, the information, the knowledge, stuff from the bench into a product. Like, as a project manager, oftentimes you'll be with a product or an idea or project or something that's going to market, all the way from conception to market. Research scientists, not so much. So Arunodoy, okay, this gives us a basic understanding of project management, but maybe you could talk about your particular type of project management, especially with your experience with clinical trials. What is that like, and how does that differ from, let's say, a project manager that's in biotech where there are no clinical trials involved?
So basically, I'll tell you kind of not just my role, but generally what you'll be expected to do if somebody joins a company as a clinical trials project manager. So is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So you will be kind of the main point of contact between the clinical study staff, the collaborating vendors. The clinical trials, it involves different sections of people. It'll be like medical investigators. It'll be, say, the drug company who produced the drug, and a CRO. So you'll be kind of the interface, like connecting all these people and communicating. And then you'll be responsible for overall implementation and operational, and making sure all the logistics of clinical study goes well, because it's very different from working in a lab. It's not just your bench work, it's much broader. There can be like various like little regulatory law differences in like little things, like, suppose you're working for a multinational company's clinical trial over like spread across 3 countries. They might have different shipping requirements or laws regarding some chemicals or medicine, and you have to keep that in mind and how that will affect your timeline or budget. And so timeline and budget are again two most important things. You have to make sure you are on track. And if there is something missing, you spend more or something, you have to make sure that everybody who's in the loop, the administrative people, are made aware of that. And then you have to, one major thing with clinical trials, since you have to submit everything to the FDA after everything is done, documentation and specific documentation, maintaining all the regulatory guidelines, that's another big responsibility of the project manager. Now, you must be thinking, this is a lot of work, obviously, and you won't be...
I am thinking that.
Yeah, you won't be doing like everything by yourself. You won't be like giving the drug, or you won't be like, maintaining all the documents, case report forms. Other people will be under you, and your job will be to make sure that everything goes smoothly, all is coordinated, and it matches with the deadlines. So another thing, like what your exact duties would be also changes based on who you are working for. Now, this is something important for people to know, where like anybody, and it's not just clinical trials project manager. If you are involved in clinical trials, you can be involved in, I would say, like two kinds of organizations. One will be what is called in clinical trials research field, it's called the sponsor. So the sponsor is a company that invented or owns the medical device or the drug. Say Pfizer or AstraZeneca, who developed it. Now they are going to test it. Often they don't need to do like all the work. They'll give the responsibility to a CRO. So say like Pfizer or Eli Lilly develops a drug, and Quintiles is running the clinical trials. So Pfizer or Eli Lilly is the sponsor, and CRO is Quintiles. So you have to, and how your responsibilities will change a little bit based on who you are working from. And also you must be aware of this difference and the terms like sponsor and CRO. It's very important for any clinical trials related job.
Does it require a lot of, we'll just go in order here, does it require a lot of travel, your position, for example, Arunodoy?
Again, it depends on the size of the clinical trial and who you are working for, the sponsor or the CRO. For example, if you are working for a small company that is testing, say, an immunoassay, right? And they are doing, say, clinical trials in 3 hospitals in 3 different states. On the other hand, the GSK or Eli Lilly is doing like, across 7 countries. So it depends, So that's the main determining factor about the amount of travel you have to do. But you have to do some amount of travel, but it's less than people who are in sales position.
Yeah, so I think that's good. So I think you'd be looking at less than 50% for sure. I mean, what I've seen is probably about 20%. So you are traveling, but it does depend on the company. But yeah, that's always a good question. So what we have here, so we have what would be the entry-level position before progression into project manager. So that's a good question. So let's say somebody can't get a project management job. They can be competitive. What do you see people transitioning into project management from, like in your current company, for example? Have you seen anybody promoted to this position or moving in from another position? Any insights there?
So generally, you'll be, like in any growth ladder, or if you cannot get into a specific position, you'll be getting into a position like just under it, basically who will be managing as a clinical project manager, right? So who you will be managing? You'll be managing clinical research associates and clinical specialists. These are the 2 positions just below the clinical trials project manager. So if you cannot break through, and I know like clinical trials breaking in is kind of tricky unless you have previous experience. And so generally companies, CROs, they want to hire somebody with an undergrad degree as a CRA, clinical research associate or clinical specialist. But with advanced degree, you might have to join as a CRA, but since you have an advanced degree, you can quickly transition in a shorter time to a clinical trials project manager.
what are like the lateral positions, the under positions? Like, give us kind of the hierarchy. You have, or how they fit together. CRA, project
Okay.
manager, all this different stuff.
So yeah. So just under the supervision of the clinical trials project manager, there will be the clinical research associates and clinical specialists. So now, remember I was telling you all this documentation, administration of the drugs and making sure, like, documenting adverse events or serious adverse events that might happen because of the drug that is being tested. So clinical specialists and CRAs, they do that. They do that work, and project manager supervises that. And just above the project manager, you have the senior project manager. So
clever title, makes sense.
Yeah. And so this, I'm also kind of telling you, like, what will be your career progression. So if you join, say, you cannot join as a clinical trials project manager, you join as a CRA, then you become a clinical trials project manager, then you become a senior project manager, and then you become associate director of clinical trials management, and then you become director of the clinical trials management division of your company. So this is like the general growth.
So CRA, CTPM, then senior CTPM, and so forth. So the CRA is really the kind of entry-level position if you guys are looking to get into that. Now, so Arunodoy, for clarity, do you have a PMP degree or certification?
No, I don't.
Okay, no, this is good. So you don't need a PMP to get into project management. You don't. You do not need more certifications or schooling. You don't need to, you just don't need to. I think it's more I mean, it depends. I don't know. Like, if you're going to get one now, that's fine. You can leverage it, sure, of course. But I think it's important to note that we're talking to somebody right now who doesn't have this certification. Yeah, Arunodoy, please.
Regarding that requirement, I hear this a lot, that you will require like a PMP. Obviously, like, having something like that helps, but I think another question I get along with that is, how do they need to prepare themselves? What a PhD needs to have, and that's something So what I want to say about that is, there are certain skills that a science PhD develops while working in the PhD lab, and one of them that is very important, and clinical trials project management, position looks for, that is knowledge of a specific therapeutic area. So if you had like a PhD, say that works with cardiac diseases or eye diseases or cancer, then it will be easier for you to find a specific clinical trials for that. And even like therapies are becoming more and more complex now. Like 10 years ago, nobody was talking about immuno-oncology or gene therapy or monoclonal antibodies. They're all very common now. And so in these fields, it's people are more reluctant to hire an undergrad, even though they have a lot of experience. They want a science PhD. So in these complex therapeutic areas, PhDs have an advantage. And so besides that, like, this is an advantage of having like a science PhD. And then there are a couple of things I would like to say that PhDs need to develop or learn outside what they can learn in the lab. And two of them are, which is very, very important, as you have noticed, like when I was telling you about the responsibilities and all, I used a lot of acronyms. And this is very, very common and very important for, even in interviews, they won't always use the abbreviation. So you have to know those terms. And another thing that you have to develop besides your PhD knowledge and whatever you pick up during your grad school is that, and which are, regulatory laws. And nobody will teach you regulatory laws, even if you're doing a cancer biology PhD. And that's something you'll have to pick up.
So, okay. So I think let's let me pause right there because we're covering a lot of information here, and I think it's important I want to move on to the transferable skills and the technical skills to highlight. But just for clarity, because a lot of you are really, and this is a common thing, no matter what the position you're getting hung up on this idea that you need extra expertise, right? All the job postings say you need previous experience, but remember, they're all templates. They're always going to say you need previous experience. It's all going to say something, like Murph said here, they're all going to say you require, coordinator, assistant work, or you have to have special knowledge of that field. The best thing you can do, Arunodoy's already said, start looking for CRA positions, right? For that associate position. You can, with a PhD, get into these roles. We've seen PhDs get directly into project management roles without PMP degrees, right? So don't use it as a crutch or an excuse for yourself. The key comes down to, and this is something Arunodoy has always done very well, is using what you did in your dissertation or your research, right? Looking for the translational aspect of that and leveraging it to get positions that require that, right? Because remember, with your resumes and when you're networking and stuff, you want to leverage that. You want to persuade people that you can do this because you have a background doing this, even if it's a loose background. So I just want to say that first before we start, diving headfirst into these transferable or technical skills. So once you know that, then the question becomes, okay, what technical skills, transferable skills can I highlight? And that's where we are now. Okay, so if you could just continue on with, what additional skills could associates, people listening, whether they're transferable or technical, what could they leverage? How could they develop them? How could they communicate them on a resume or during networking interviews, so forth?
And whenever I look at any kind of job opportunity or anybody asks for advice, I tell them basically divide all the requirements into two things. One is what you already have, and second is what you can develop. So what PhDs already have is obviously, presentation skills. They already have that. They have good writing skills, and communication is very important for this kind of role. And another one, which I already mentioned earlier, is a deep knowledge of a specific therapeutic area. You should always try to leverage that. And the third quality, that PhDs already have is running a complex project. All of them have that in order to complete their own dissertation or project and everything. And then comes the 3 or 4 qualities that are required for clinical trials project manager, but I don't think all PhDs have it, and they should work on developing it. First is regulatory laws, whichever region you are in. If you're in the US, it'll be FDA. And so know the laws. And there are lots of online resources where you can read up laws, regulatory laws, and you can even go to clinicaltrials.gov and familiarize yourself with how clinical trials are organized and learn about the terms and learn about the rules. And another quality I feel some PhDs, I'm not saying all, but some lack, and that is ability to work with a diverse group of people. So all of you who you interact with, during your PhD or postdoc are also PhDs and postdocs. But when you're working in a environment which is more cross-functional and large group of people, there will be others who will be not that technical, or they'll have other expertise. You will need to collaborate and communicate with them. So these are the 3 things I feel PhDs need to develop.
No, this is good. So, okay, so where can these resources be found? Outside of going to some course, right? Obviously, Shilpi, this is why we
there are lots. I cannot. I cannot recall right now, but there are. If you just go and search for clinical trials terms, or say glossary of clinical trials terms, you will find there are lots of resources. And some, there I know PhDs who work in a drug or something that will go into clinical trial, but they don't know this phases. What happens in phase 1? What happens in phase 2? What size of subjects you need? Some subject population you need in phase 3. And these are very easy. You can find it. And also another good resource I'll suggest is clinicaltrials.gov. You just go there and you just in your free time, just do it just out of curiosity. Suppose you are looking at what's going on in immuno-oncology. So you can search like, okay, Germany or USA, how many immuno-oncology trials are going on. You can do that. And so use all these resources, and I think you'll get like a fair amount of knowledge through these.
Yeah, that's great advice. I honestly don't think you guys. I mean, I know we're like PhDs, so we think, oh, well, the answer is more certifications or more courses. If the course is right, you can definitely do that. But I would first, like Arunodoy said, dig in to the free resources first and get a strong understanding, and then go from there. Right?
And all these are like free. Like clinicaltrials.gov will also help you in your own work. Suppose you don't go into clinical trials, but you go into something that is translational. Suppose you are working in, say, eye diseases, like I was doing with age-related macular degeneration. So just getting familiarized what's the current thing that's going on, and and what going on in clinical trials, what drugs are about to come out in the market. It will be a great way of familiarizing yourself with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we talked about the skills, the transferable skills. Let's talk about your path getting into this position more specifically, Arunodoy. So, and I mean this on a practical level in terms of what is the interview process for these types of roles? Like, what are some typical interview questions that are common? I mean, if you've sat in on interviews on the other side of the table, what are some of the things you've asked, and so forth?
In interviews, again, they'll try to judge 3 or 4 things. First will be knowledge of therapeutic area, and this will depend on what that company focuses on. If it's a really large company, they might select you. Suppose your PhD is in cardiac disease, they'll be like, okay, we will put you only in cardiac disease division. If it's a smaller company doing 2-3 different things, you might be asked, about your knowledge in 2-3 different therapeutic area. And I think this will be a strong point for science PhDs. And second thing they'll try to understand is, as I mentioned, your knowledge of the clinical trials pathway or the process. In one of my interviews, they asked me, after the first round, they sent me just an outline of a clinical trials, like a fake drug, and they said, oh, when you come for the next round of interviews, do a presentation, just 5-6 slides, what will happen in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and do a flow chart. And they categorically told, use as little wording as possible, do flow chart and diagrams. And so that's something you have to know, the pathway, what happens in phase 1, what happens in phase 2, what happens in phase 3. And the third thing you will be tested on will be basic knowledge of regulatory rules, FDA regulatory rules, and also terms. There are some very commonly used terms, say CRF or case report forms. SAE will be serious adverse event, so that you will be tested on that. And also they'll try to judge your ability to collaborate, and how if you are good with communication, and if you're good at collaborating with different kinds of people.
Thank you for joining us for another Industry Careers for PhDs podcast. If you're interested in attending one of these interviews live, or if you're interested in getting access to the full interview, including all of the background materials and show notes, go to cheekyscientist.com/association and learn how to become an associate. You can get on the wait list for the next association enrollment period there and learn full details about the program. It's a program specifically designed to help PhDs transition into top industry positions. If you would like to receive more of these interview highlights via our podcast sent directly to your email, go to cheekyscientist.com and email subscribe under where it says Start Here. If you haven't already, you can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Until next week, remember your value as a PhD and start thinking and acting like a successful industry professional.